Okay, thank you so much for that. Yes, I agree with generally, the treatment of tuberculosis is entirely free as far as Nigeria is concerned and some of the tuberculosis endemic regions. You see, when you come to the hospital, usually before the doctor even gets to that point of making that diagnosis of tuberculosis, a lot of things could have been done. Probably some other investigations. You know, you have to pay for it from your own pocket in case you are not covered by national health insurance. You know, so you have to spend that until the point at which the physician has made that diagnosis of tuberculosis. You know, but even at that, there are some investigations for the tuberculosis. Once the physician has his suspicions for that disease, you know, it is paid by some organizations or by the government, so to say, in terms of collaboration. You know, there are some investigations when we write, we tell the patient, these ones are free. Just go to the lab. They will do it for you at no cost. You know, so, and then once the diagnosis has been made, all the medications are free. To the best of my knowledge, nobody have ever received any money in exchange for medications for tuberculosis. But you know, when you're talking about healthcare generally, you know, accessing health services, it does not just involve medications, okay? There's what we call the direct and indirect costs of healthcare. How much does the patient spend? For instance, if the patient is coming from 20 kilometers away from the hospital or 5 kilometers away, how much does the patient pay as his transportation before coming to the hospital? You're also looking at if this patient have already stayed out of his work just to come and access this care. These are all some of the costs we're talking about, you know. Then when they come, they have to open folder in the hospital. They need to open a file before they see a doctor, before a doctor sees them. Sometimes, like my other colleague have mentioned there, they have cough. And those cough are usually related to probably chest infections, some other chest infections. So they will go to some private settings, they will spend money for that and all that. And before you get to know, this patient could have spent a reasonable amount of money. But I can tell you that treatment for tuberculosis is entirely free.
That's lack of awareness.
Multifactorial issue here. You know, the fact that Nigeria is still battling with tuberculosis is a multifactorial problem. Number one, yes, issue of access to health services is one of the issues that we cannot run away from. We have a very weak health system in Nigeria. You know, if you have a patient who stays, for instance, in let's say in Kefi, and then the patient has to travel down to maybe a village in Kefi, and then the patient has to travel maybe about 10 kilometers just to access care for tuberculosis, and the patient does not even have money to eat for that day, not to even talk of transporting himself. Of course, the patient will not go there to access the health care. But how this health system, if health systems are strengthened, what I mean by this is that by the time you have like primary health care systems that are well strengthened and patients can easily go in there, probably just a few minutes walk from your house to that place, you have all the care you need as per tuberculosis, then you know, of course, that would actually solve the problem. So access to free care is another problem, which the government needs to look into it in terms of strengthening the health system, right from the primary health care system to tertiary system, and then to secondary healthcare facilities, and then down to the tertiary. You know, ideally in the tertiary health system, people should not be seeing common tuberculosis. Okay, these things should have been addressed at basically the primary and secondary. If it becomes complicated, yes, you can now send them to the tertiary where specialists will be able to see them. Another thing is the emergence of the drug resistance. Okay, we are beginning to experience resistance of drugs of this tuberculosis. And you know, once you start taking medications for tuberculosis, it's usually classified into two phases, the intensive and then the continuation phase. The physicians always counsel these patients on the need for compliance. If you miss this medication for a certain period of time, it will amount to going back to start taking all over again. And taking these drugs on its own is not easy. It's a very difficult task. That's just the truth. And if they don't do that, probably somebody goes back to the village, nobody to monitor him, to say, oh, this is your time to take medications and stuff like that. Then that patient is already creating room for drug-resistant tuberculosis. So that, again, is actually increasing some of the burden of tuberculosis we have in the country. Again, you know, just before 2020, just like my colleague have mentioned in the studio there, Nigeria have tried as much as it could to address this tuberculosis to a greater extent. But prior to that COVID-19 epidemic, you know, the COVID-19 came with its own unique issues. And the interruption of health services at the time also contributed to the increasing incidence of tuberculosis that we're beginning to see in the environment. Not to also forget about the climate change. I think it's another factor too, you know, that is actually affecting tuberculosis treatment and then also increasing the incidence of tuberculosis in our environment. But I think, be that as it may, Nigeria as a whole, I think we're making some progress. We should not just be talking about we're not doing anything. I think we're making some progress. When you look at the CDC statistics currently, Nigeria is somewhere at the fifth. There is what they call tuberculosis belts or tuberculosis regions. You know, India is topping the list. Then you have Indonesia and others before even Nigeria. Nigeria is somewhere around the fifth. It put at about 4.7% compared to India that is around 27%. So you can see we're making progress. So if only government can actually address some of those issues that I've mentioned earlier, then I think we'll be able to work towards eradicating, towards having a zero tuberculosis in Nigeria by the year 2030.
Thank you very much.